Welcome to today's webinar on eTapestry Donor Retention Tools. My name is Allie, and I'm an eTapestry consultant with Psychic Solutions. We're an independent consulting company that makes eTapestry easier to use and more effective for organizations of all sizes. I'm here with my colleague, Jeff Haygood, owner and founder of Psychic Solutions. You want to say hi, Jeff?
Hey everyone, welcome and thanks for joining today. We're excited to share some of our expertise with you and the best ways to use eTapestry for your fundraising efforts. There's a lot of ways that you can use eTapestry to be more strategic in how you make decisions, save resources when you're renewing donors. There's a lot of features packed into eTapestry that we think you can use to get more from the tool. So we're excited to share some of our favorites with you here today. And so go ahead, Allie, thanks.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, so Jeff's going to stick around and make sure we address all your questions today. We'll be wrapping up a few minutes early and taking any questions you have at the end of the presentation. So while I'm talking, you can feel free and throw them into your GoToMeeting webinar task menu, or you can hold on to them until the end and we'll address them when we wrap up. So I'm connecting with you all today from Seattle, Washington. That's where I live and work remotely with organizations that are looking to improve how they use their eTapestry database. In today's webinar, we will be discussing the top eTapestry features and tools that we think you can use to identify and renew your lapsed donors. Specifically, we will cover the top tools to identify lapsed donors that need follow-up, send renewal reminders and targeted appeals, collect donations online while tracking the success of your appeals, and report on renewal progress and benchmark your renewal rates. So how can eTapestry help you retain your donors? If you're looking to improve your donor retention, there are many eTapestry features and tools that can help you focus your fundraising efforts for better results. And today we will explore how you can use eTapestry's core features to inform, manage, and implement your fundraising strategy to retain your donors. So we'll be discussing the best ways to use queries to segment your data into lapsed donor lists, the best way to use reports to track progress toward your renewal goals for the year and to export data to take action, how to use communication templates to send personalized renewal reminders or appeals to your donors with letter or email templates that you set up in eTapestry, and also how to use DIY forms to direct donors to make gifts more easily online while still tracking key details that help you make smarter decisions on how you go about renewing your donors in the future. The first step toward improving donor retention is knowing where to focus your efforts. You want to get started by using eTapestry queries and reports to identify and assess next steps with your lapsed donors. Luckily, every eTapestry donor database comes out of the box with a set of standard LIBUNT and SciBUNT queries you can use to report on your current, prior, and lapsed donors. So if we jump to eTapestry, you'll find these queries in a category called LIBUNT and SciBUNT, right here in the Queries tab. LIBUNT, if you don't already know, stands for last year, but unfortunately not this year, while SciBUNT stands for some year, but unfortunately not this year. These are built-in lapsed donor queries. They're not modifiable, and they include donors based on received transactions of anything greater than $0. Nonetheless, they're really incredibly helpful and underused. So if you haven't been using these to date, I definitely recommend taking a look. You're going to be sure to take advantage of these to identify and report on lapsed donors this year. You can use this whether you want to identify donors this year, so calendar year. This LIBUNT query here is your last year, but not this year. But there's also one down here for last fiscal year, but not this fiscal year. And you can also use it for all donors. So that's what the some year, but not this year is. And of course, there's a partner for fiscal year. So some year, but not this fiscal year. Now, if these standard queries aren't specific enough for your needs, and sometimes they're not, You can also build your own custom lapse donor queries. Building your own queries will allow you to identify lapse donors based on their giving to, say, a specific fund or strategy instead of all of them, which is how the standard queries are built. It also allows you to report on giving during a non-standard time frame. Maybe you want to see lapse donors that gave at a certain time of year, but not this year. And it also allows you to query on giving lapse donors that have giving other than just received transactions. So if you want to include pledges or soft credits in how you define a lapse donor, you'll need a custom query. So how do you go about building a custom query of lapse donors? In eTapestry, in order to query on lapse donors, you actually need 3 different queries. So it's a little more complicated than your everyday query. So actually, this is a pretty common question. You can build a lapse donor query in 3 steps. First, set up a query of donors that are current. In other words, they have already given in the renewal period. Usually this means like a query of donors this year. So they're your current donors. Second, you want to set up a query of donors that gave previously who you want to renew this time period. So usually this means donors last year, if you're looking at just people who gave in the prior year but not this year. So again, the second query is donors you want to renew. Finally, you want to set up a compound query to exclude the donors that gave already, which is your first query, from the donors that gave before that you want to renew, which is your second query. So that ultimately you're left with only the donors that gave before but have yet to give in the current period. This is your lapse donor query. So if we jump into eTapestry, you can see this setup modeled in eTapestry's standard LibEnt query. This is a compound query, and it takes a query of donors that gave this year, which is my query number 2 right here, and it subtracts it from a query of donors who gave last year. So that you are left with only the donors who gave last year but not this year, your LibEnts. When you go to build a custom lapse donor query for a different time period or donor group, your goal is to replicate this structure with new custom queries for the specific donors or time frame you're interested in. Now, my favorite custom lapse donor query is gave this time last year, but not this year. This is a query that can be used to identify donors that gave around this time last year, so June 2016, but they haven't given yet this year. This way, I can follow up with them a year out from when they last gave. Setting up this query in eTapestry takes 3 separate queries, just like any of my lapse donor queries. So I've actually built this out in a donor retention query section right here. The first query that you need is called Gave This Year. It's going to be all my donors with a received transaction over $0 and a dynamic date range of this year. The second query that I need is Gave This Time last year. You can build this query to include all donors with a received transaction over 0, just like my Gave This Year, and a custom date range of this time last year. I defined this as this month last year, so June 1st to June 30th, but you can define this as you want. And actually, every time you run this, you would be modifying the this time this year definition. And finally, you need a compound query that compares these 2 initial queries to give you gave this time last year, but not this year, which is the one I have here. You can build this query by setting up a new compound query, which you have to do from a query category itself, and subtracting your gave this year query from your gave this time last year query. The resulting list can be exported for review and used to send annual renewal reminders or otherwise follow up with these lapse donors. But a list of lapsed donors is only so useful if all you have access to is their name and contact information, as we see here. So once you've identified your lapsed donors with eTapestry queries, you want to use custom reports to export their giving history data for further donor analysis and prioritization of your follow-up. Now, there's no one standard eTapestry report that will give you detailed giving history for your lapsed donors, but custom eTapestry reports can be used to report on summarized giving data, allowing you to analyze lapsed donor giving tendencies over the last 5 years, to report on their last, first, and largest gifts, even their lifetime giving, to prioritize and assign next actions, and to develop a personalized call, email, or mailing list with your lapsed donors. You want to use summary fields in your custom report to include summarized giving data for each of your donors so that you can export giving totals to Excel and review and analyze the list, say for largest donors, last gift, and more. And you can set up your custom lapsed donor report under Reports, Manage Reports. We've built ours in a donor retention reports category, and we called it Donor Report with Contact Information and Giving History. You'll see that we've added columns for 5 years of giving history, 1 year ago, 2 years ago, etc. Last gift amount and date, which is last received date and amount. First gift date, as well as largest and lifetime giving details. You can add these and other similar columns under the field section here, under Browse Fields, for summary fields. This is where you'll find all these summary data options. And if you want these for household giving rather than account giving, you'll find giving history options under a separate category for household fields. These are going to summarize giving data for a household unit rather than a specific account. Now, when reporting on your lapsed donor queries, you can include any account or summary field because you're reporting on a list of donors. We recommend at least including columns for name and salutations, contact information, last gift amount and date, as well as mailing status, and any other key constituent field that tracks communication preferences. The priority here, when building your lapsed donor report and picking your columns, is to include any and all fields that you may need to identify, analyze, and take next steps with your donors to renew them once you have the list in Excel. Now, identifying and analyzing your lapsed donors is only step 1. Step 2, as you know, is soliciting them for the next gift. And for this, you can use eTapestry's communication templates to create personalized and targeted renewal reminders or appeals. eTapestry communication templates can be used to send emails or generate documents by merging in data from any field in your database. This means that you can easily personalize a renewal reminder or appeal with the donor's name, contact information, and even the amount of their last gift or the combined total of their gifts in a previous year. With custom queries of lapsed donors, you can also generate targeted letters based on the date of the lapsed donor's gift in the previous year. For example, you could use the query "gave this time last year, but not this year" to send an annual reminder asking the donor to renew their support. Generating documents or sending a mass email to a group of donors requires you to first build a communication template with relevant merge fields. This is your letter or email. Second, to build a query of recipients. So in this conversation, we'll be talking about that query of lapsed donors, the people you either want to send the letter to or the email. Finally, generate the documents or send an email to populate the template with the data in your query. So taking the data from your query of recipients, mail merging it into your documents using the communication template, and either downloading the letters or sending the email out. You can set up communication templates from the Communication tab in eTapestry. If you go to Manage Communications, I've created one here under Appeal Letters for an annual renewal reminder, just as an example. You can add eTapestry merge fields like last received amount or 1 year ago received amount by editing a section, selecting the Insert Merge Value option, and choosing the field you want to include from the field list. There are different sections, and then the list of fields changes based on the section you select. You can also search. Now, when you send your letter, you also want to consider providing a link or a reference to an online donation form. eTapestry DIY forms allow you to set up custom online giving forms that you can link to or embed on your website. These forms process and add donations directly to your database. So make renewing easy for your donors and data entry easy for you by setting up custom DIY forms to collect online donations. But you also want to track the performance of your renewal efforts. And to do this, you'll need to be more intentional with how you set up your online forms. In eTapestry, in order to track what fundraising strategy caused a donor to make a gift, you'll need to use a unique online form for each fundraising appeal you send to your donors. So have you ever marked a contribution envelope before you include it in a mailing, maybe with like a highlighter, so that when you get a gift in the mail, you know which mailing the donor is responding to? Yeah, so you can do something similar with DIY forms by creating a separate form for each appeal, customizing the settings in each form so that transactions are coded with a unique approach value, and then sharing each form's URL only through the related appeals mailing or email. If you set up the DIY form settings with a custom approach value, you'll know from the transactions that are created when a donor completes that form which appeal the donor is responding to. So DIY forms are created under the Management tab in eTapestry, DIY forms. And transaction codes like approach are defined in the settings of each form. You'll see here that I have 2 online giving forms created, one for an end of year appeal and one for donor renewal reminders. This was intentional because I want to code donations made through each form differently, just like I mark my physical contribution envelopes differently for unique mailings. When I modify a form, I can access the settings right here in the upper left corner. For each appeal-specific form that you create, you want to be sure the approach value you add down here identifies the appeal through which donors are gaining access to the form. So for this end-of-year appeal form, you'll see I have an approach specific to my end-of-year appeal. But if we go back to my renewal reminder form, you'll see I have a different approach code to identify gifts that come through that solicitation method. Now, I know that creating unique DIY forms for each appeal may be more complicated than just directing a donor back to your general Donate Now form on your website. But the data you collect will help you determine which fundraising strategy is most successful. And this will ultimately help you make smarter decisions in the future so that you can renew your donors more easily, which ultimately is your goal. In general, when you build an eTapestry DIY form, you want to keep these other tips in mind. So first, it's best practice to embed your DIY form on your website if you can. This will allow you to keep your donors on your website and direct donors to a URL that's familiar rather than labeled eTapestry or Blackbaud. Next, you want to keep your form as simple and as easy to use as possible by modifying the settings for each question on your form to label them more clearly. You can change a question from being labeled as the field name to being labeled whatever you want it to be labeled, to require them if necessary, and modify the options the user sees to only those they need to see. You also want to use hidden fields in the DIY form settings to add data to your database without requiring input from the online donor. So this is most helpful for required fields like account type, where you don't want to ask the donor what kind of donor they are when they give you a gift. You just want to define it for them. Finally, you can use eTapestry standard reports to keep track of your donor renewal rate and fundraising progress to date. Our two favorite eTapestry standard reports can help you track your progress toward 100% donor retention by calculating your donor renewal rate, as well as the total amount of revenue that is left to raise from lapsed donors. So let's talk about those. Our number one favorite report for donor retention is called the Giving Dynamics Report. The Giving Dynamics Report is a standard report that comes with eTapestry out of the box. It will take any query of accounts and identify new, recaptured, same, upgrade, downgrade, and lapsed donors, and their giving across 2 consecutive timeframes. This is an incredibly valuable report. Really, it's my favorite. And it's because it can help you analyze and inform your fundraising strategy really pretty quickly. So if you do not use this report yet, I definitely recommend that you start doing so if you can. So you can run this report under Reports, eTapestry Standard Reports, and then it's right here under Executive Reports, Giving Dynamics. I like to run this on all constituents in the database so that I'm looking at Giving Dynamics across all of my donors. But you may choose a query of any accounts to focus on a subset of your donors if you prefer. This report must be run on consecutive timeframes, meaning the second date range must follow directly after the first without any gap. For our purposes, I will compare Giving Dynamics for this calendar year against last calendar year. So let me enter these here. Now, I recommend running this report every month on the same time frame to keep track of how many lapsed donors are remaining for the current year. For me, that's 11 down here, 6 lapsed news, 5 lapsed other. And how much they gave last calendar year, and thus how much I can expect to raise if I manage to retain all of my donors from the prior year. For me, that's a little over $1,000 that I've left to raise this year. If your goal is to renew all your donors, you want to see your total changed, which is this category, or this column right here. You want to see that total change for my lapsed donors nearing 0 by the end of your year. Now, our second favorite report for donor retention is the Donor Renewal Rates Report. This report analyzes transaction data over 2 to 5 different time periods to identify which donors gave in what period and calculate donor renewal rates for new, established, and all donors. This is another standard eTapestry report, and it's available in all eTapestry databases out of the box. And I think it's best used to identify your current year donor renewal rate, which is down here in the corner, to compare renewal rates over multiple years. Again, you can have 5 different time frames, and to identify trends and set goals. This report is accessed under Standard Reports, right here under Executive Reports, Donor Renewal Rates. You can run this report with any query of accounts or journal entries. I generally run this on all constituents in the database so that I'm looking at donor renewal dynamics across all donors and all gifts. But by selecting another query, you can also generate renewal rates for particular types of donors or maybe specific areas of giving. So that's an option with a different query. I recommend running this report with at least 3 consecutive time frames because that's going to get you 2 renewal rate comparisons this year and the prior year. And I definitely recommend you include this year if you want to get a current renewal rate. So I'm going to use 2015 through 2017 calendar years. You can see here at the bottom your donor renewal rate, which shows the percent of donors from the first time frame, or the prior time frame, which for me is 2016, that gave again in the second. You can also see specific renewal rates for new versus established donors, which is what these sections are. I recommend running this report every month or so to keep tabs on your renewal rate to date and how it changes, especially compared to last year throughout the year. So definitely use these reports, use these metrics to stay informed about the status of your donor retention throughout the year and make strategic decisions, because these can inform your strategy and your next steps and what you do to retain your donors through the year. If the things we covered today are systems or reports you wish you had access to, but you're not sure where to start, please get in touch. We're here to help you get the most from eTapestry database. So don't hesitate to reach out to get support setting up your custom donor retention systems or just to talk through your options. We can help you reach your goals by building out custom reports, custom dashboards, and analytics that help you retain your donors and report out to your board. And we provide free consultations to get you started in the right direction. You can get in touch with us at info@sidekicksolutionsllc.com, and we'll be happy to discuss your options. So that's it for our presentation today. At this point, we'll be opening it up for Q&A. Jeff and I will be happy to take any questions you have. If you have a question that you haven't posted yet, you can go ahead and type it into the questions section of your GoToWebinar toolbar, and I'll be happy to address it for the group. So Jeff, are there any questions that have come through since we started?
No questions yet, but we'll go ahead and wait here and see if anyone has any questions about the topics that we've brought up.
Great, sounds good.
Great, so I do have a question here. What is an ideal renewal rate? Great question. It does vary from organization to organization, and I would also say that it varies from expert to expert on what is an appropriate rate of renewal. I would point you to some research that's been done on donor retention and renewal rates. I believe, let me see if I can find that.
Yeah, Jeff, while you're looking, I'll just say that you probably saw like 30-something% in my reports, and that's not real data. It's a test database, so it's not really not a good benchmark. Just wanted to say that.
Allie,
go ahead, Jeff.
Go ahead. Sorry, I did find the report. The Association of Fundraising Professionals does an annual fundraising effectiveness project. It's a survey of donor retention information, and you can search that, type that into a search. It'll come up very quickly at the top of your results. Again, the Association of Fundraising Professionals does a fundraising effectiveness project where they analyze donor retention rates and provide some insight into appropriate rates as well as steps you can take to improve. So that's a great resource to take a look at. Okay, another question here, Allie. I do not have access to donor renewal rates report. Any suggestions on other ways to access the information? So I'll quickly talk about some databases, depending on the license that you use and whether or not you've upgraded to the eTapestry packages. Your database may not have these reports. And if you don't, you will probably need to take a look at custom reports in conjunction with Excel. So, Allie, I know you have some experience with that. I don't know if you have any additional comments.
Yeah, I would just say this report is great because it calculates it for you, but the data is in your database. So you can still calculate your renewal rate even if you don't have this executive report suite. What I would do is export your custom lapsed donor queries like we talked about. You actually will want several queries. You'll want your gave last year, and then you want your sort of a reverse of a lapsed donor query. You want gave this year that also gave last year. And so if you're able to export both of those subsets, then you have your counts, and you can calculate your renewal rate, which is number of donors that gave this year out of your last year donors. So it's just a simple division. You can also find that calculation online if you're looking for exact numbers to plug in. But yeah, if you export your donors from last year, as well as their giving history for this year, that's a quick way to get a count in Excel that you can use to calculate that number.
Great. So we don't have any other questions at this time, so we'll hang on about a minute. And if there are no other questions, we'll go ahead and close down. I do see there's a couple of questions about the presentation. You will receive an email later today with a copy of the recorded version of this presentation in that email. So be on the lookout for that. Ali, another question here. Is there a way to report on the donors who decreased or increased donations from year to year?
Yeah, great question. So the easiest way to do that, if you have these reports, you can get that information quickly through your Giving Dynamics report. So if I just run this again, I'll show you how to get that data. So if you run your Giving Dynamics report on the time frame you're interested in, so the two timeframes you want to compare for same upgrades and downgrades, you'll see I have these listed over here, and it says I don't have any upgrades or sames. I don't have a lot of donors in my database here, but I do have 5 downgrades. If I click on this totals over here, I'm going to get a static list of the donors that eTapestry has told me are downgrades. In other words, they gave more in the first period than they gave in the second, and this is a cumulative calculation. So Bruce Wayne here gave 1,700 in 2016, but only 1,200 in 2017. And so this is how I can most easily get my downgrade list. If I wanted to do something with this list, because you'll see here I don't have any contact information or details about these donors, I can take this list and turn it into a custom account query down here in the corner. By creating custom query, I pick my category. Maybe I want to put it in my test query. You actually have a standard query category for custom account queries. I'd name it, downgrade, donors, 2016, 2017. I'd put a date as of today. Because again, this is a static list. Tomorrow your downgrades might be different. You can create that, and then it'll actually create the custom query for you, and you can use custom reports to export additional data on them. So that's one way to get your downgrades, upgrades, sames. If you don't have this report, then you're not going to be able to use this. What I like to do to get my sames, downgrades, and upgrades is to use custom reports and aggregates in custom reports to generate my totals per donor for, essentially replicate this structure. Report on all my donors from this year and what they gave last year, what they gave this year, and then do a comparison in Excel to calculate who's downgrade, who's upgrade, and who's the same. So there's options there. Whether you have standard reports or custom reports, it's possible to get those numbers.
Great. And I would also highlight that we do prefer and like using Excel in a lot of these more complex calculations. It gives us a lot of flexibility. We can also add charts, visualizations, and formulas to reports that eTapestry may not be able to give us in either standard or custom reports. So for us personally, we do rely a lot on Excel, especially when we're looking to segment our data in more complex ways. Another question, can DIY forms be used if our website is not linked to eTapestry? So I'll go ahead and take this one. So the DIY form itself is actually the link to your website. There's no additional link that needs to be made to your website in terms of connecting to eTapestry. You can either link directly to a hosted form that Blackbaud provides for your DIY form, or you can embed that form in an existing page on your website. So out of the box, creating a DIY form, you can put that into your website or link to that form on your website without needing any additional integrations or web development time. What a good question. All right, Allie, I'm not seeing any other questions, so why don't we go ahead and close down here. We'll go ahead and send the recorded version of the presentation, and we can take future questions offline via email.
Great. Sounds good. Well, thanks everybody for joining us, and we hope to connect in the future. Please let us know if you have any questions.